Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out insightsinsound.com for a full list of our podcasts and YouTube series.
My guest is engineer, producer, and all-around interesting fellow.
Schlep.
Niko Bolas. Niko, good to see you.
Daniel. It's good we finally got together.
No kidding.
It's only
and
taken 6 months or a year.
A little bit more than that, but yeah, who's counting, you know? And we are in this really interesting space here. You pretty much just built your own studio out of masking tape and blankets. And,
a racer's term, duct tape and baling wire.
Yeah,
I knew what I wanted to hear, and I knew what I didn't want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So I just built around that and didn't really care what it looked like, obviously. And it's mostly insole quilt from the old Technicolor soundstage.
It's a look.
Yeah, it's a look.
You know, it's
the same one you get if you get 5150.
I think maybe if you haven't got a name for this place yet, I suggest Meat Locker Studios.
Meat Locker Studios. Well, I'll pass it around, see what they say.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about your background. I mean, obviously you have, if I look at your CV, you've worked with some amazing artists. You know, obviously you're best known for your work with Neil Young, Warren Zevon, among others. You've done some really eclectic stuff, and all your stuff has a certain sound to it, which I want to get into in a moment here.
I have no idea what that is. But
we never know what our own sound is, obviously.
Yeah.
But what I have noticed about your mixes, let's just go there. What I have noticed about your mixes is not just sparse, but almost stark. I mean, you're not a huge fan of reverb. You're not or at least you're not an abuser of it. Let's put it that way.
Unless I'm doing a Mavericks record.
Yeah, okay, but that doesn't sound like reverb to me either.
Yeah.
That sounds like, just recording everything in a, I don't know, whatever it is, tiled room or something.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I can always pick out the vocal. I can always pick out the
good.
key instruments. And that's something really, there's something almost really stark about your mixes.
Well, I hope that's a good thing.
Well, to me it is,
cool.
But, other people might hate it, I don't know. But it's an interesting quality that you have about the mix.
I don't have any notions. I just shove everything up and then keep moving it around until it feels like what they explained, the artist. And I usually love being produced when I mix, like with the Mavericks. It's Raul Malo all the way. He wrote it, he sang it, he played a lot of the instruments, and he knows what it's supposed to do when it hits your body. One thing I do is I listen really loud because I was raised that way. Yeah, exactly. I was raised by guys that, we grew up on Altex, and
Voice of the theater, baby.
Yeah, they just, it's right there.
Yep.
So there's not a lot of room for stuff. Perhaps that's it. I don't know. I just add to taste and move on.
I always think of, I liken it to sculpting, where a lot of what you're doing is getting rid of shit.
Because
every
everything
song
that doesn't
has,
look like the statue.
Yeah,
right.
like every song idea comes with way more than its share of stuff you can try.
I find that, especially when I'm working or helping people out that have already, gotten X distance into finishing their body of work or whatever they're working on, that self-doubt and boredom sets in.
Yeah.
As they're working.
Yeah.
And, with a lot of, I've been very fortunate, and I work with people that are immensely, way more talented than I am, and artists, true artists. And if they do a vocal and you get goosebumps when you hear it, you realize that you're hearing it without any effects.
Yeah.
They're just singing from their heart, and it's ripping yours out. But if you listen to it every day for 2 weeks because you're doing tambourines and shakers and you're trying this and you're trying that, boredom sets in.
Loses the
and then you
sheen.
start thinking, I should be doing something to make this special. So you start adding stuff, and it generally winds up being whatever it is you first learned 2 weeks ago, plug in or new reverb or a tank or something.
Yeah.
And it possibly is not needed. It was great to begin with. And a lot of times, especially when you listen loud, you shove it up and you realize, Jesus, the effect is more apparent really against my body than what I'm trying to listen to, which is the voice or the guitar. So you'll turn it off.
Yeah. So what's your own musical background?
My own musical background. My mother was a classical guitar player, singer, but wound up raising kids instead. So there was always music around the house. My music teacher, Frank, rented our garage apartment and lived behind us for 10 years of my life when I was like, I don't know, 4 to 12 or something.
That's not 10, but okay.
It was 8. Nobody said I could do math. 2 to 12. There was just always music around, especially with my parents. In the 60s, their relationship, they were teenagers in the 50s, so they always had parties. And everybody brought guitars and played. But my first interaction with music, I could play instruments and I could read and I took the classes. I had no interest. But we had a 3M tape machine with a little ribbon mic, and I would set it up and record when they would play. That was fascinating because it had buttons and switches and knobs and needles.
So the left brain component was...
You'd roll it back and play it, and you could hear it, and then it was louder if you did this and you did this. And so I was always playing around with stuff. But I don't really have a musical background other than what you get in a public school, and being able to play, but not... the cats that are really good have no choice.
Oh, no question. Yeah.
Practice to them isn't practice. It's their life.
Yes.
And for me, it was practice. I had to do 30 minutes on the accordion. I had to do 30 minutes on the trumpet. I had to do 30 minutes on the guitar, and I didn't want it. I wanted to go work on my motorcycle. So that's really where my passion was wrenching on motorcycles and cars.
Well, there's some interesting parallels there, because if you think about the idea of an arrangement, an arrangement of a song has a lot of parallels to, let's say, a combustion engine.
Oh, it all does.
Yeah.
It's all mechanics.
Yeah.
It's funny. You're very right. When
It's problem solving too.
I came back, I was on the road for 2 years with an IMSA team as a mechanic. And I came back for a hiatus, and I was going to go on the road again. And I got a job in a studio. And to me, it was the same gig. You worked all night on a project and then try to figure out everything that you can do to make it better. Like when I get all my mics in phase, that to me is the same thing as free horsepower. When you get all titanium hardware and your motorcycle drops 10 pounds, you just got free horsepower by doing nothing but knowing what to bolt where. So when you set up a big orchestra and everything's in phase and all the microphones are moving in the same direction, it's free horsepower. It's the same analogy, as you said. It metaphorically, it's the same to me, but it's much cleaner. I don't wake up with grease under my fingernails.
There's another metaphor there too, which is the idea of, we were talking about English sports cars, and the old running joke about English sports cars is you work on it all week to drive it on the weekends, right?
Sure.
The amount of work that goes into creating a track versus, that track is over in 3 minutes,
Yeah, you're done.
Yeah, exactly. And nobody really knows how that sausage was made, except those of us who were there. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I don't even know how they get made. I think the whole gig is to get as fast as you can with whatever tools you got. Yeah. Whether you're a pit crew and you're just changing the left front tire, that's your whole job. So you learn where to grab it, how to balance it, get it over the wall, how to, get the rattle wrench, knock the bolts off, slam it on, get it on and get out of the way. And you work on just that so that you can do it before the car comes to a stop, you're on it.
So that you can be there for the benefit of the driver. Same way we're there for the benefit of the musician.
They're in, they're out, they're gone.
Yeah.
if you learn all this really well so that when an artist walks in the room, the minute they start to create, they're not even aware they're creating because they don't know that you're working, then you've recorded it before they're aware they started.
Which are usually the best recordings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the gig.
I've always really been a fan of the idea of always being record.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
You have to.
Mm-hmm.
My rule, and I've said this before, and I tell all my assistants, you put it into record and then you set up the microphones in that order.
Yeah, yeah.
Because a lot of the people I work with, these cats walk in and she might just see a mic and have a guitar and say, I was thinking of this, and does the one that comes from out there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then in everybody's mind, now we're going to do it for real. But in fact, you got the real one already.
Well, and you just put your finger on the whole thing that I really like, which is the idea of that creative process, I'm sure you read Rick Rubin's book,
I've read parts of it, yeah.
The intro is the thing that interests me, where he talks about the idea, and I've always believed that there is sort of a, shall we say, a collective unconscious
I
out
believe
there,
that. He's right.
And, he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but part of the introduction of the book is talking about how if you work on an idea and that idea doesn't happen for you, and then maybe a month later somebody else comes out with it, they didn't steal your idea. It's just that you weren't the right conduit at the right time for that idea to be birthed. And that's all we really are, as a conduit for these ideas.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the idea
right.
of capturing that magic, that to me is the most important thing.
Just always have your glove on. Catch anything that comes over the plate.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
not up to you to decide if it's a strike or a foul.
Yeah.
Or a ball, whatever baseball terms are.
Yeah.
That's not up to you. Just catch it.
You are, among other things, from what I know of you, quite a technology geek, right? You really love your technology. You're very much, I would say, probably ahead of the curve on a lot of stuff, or at least, at the leading edge.
So
of a
I
lot of
hate
stuff.
everything earlier than most people.
Probably so. Yeah, probably so. Don't we all? But you also came up in a completely different era in terms of the technology we had. Now, I assume you're, roughly my age, so you came up with like 4-track, 8-track, in the era of tape.
That's where we started.
Yeah, and there's a two-edged sword to that. The one side is we had to work a lot harder because we had limited resources. We had limited tracks. We had, limited instruments, all that stuff. And, the other part of that is we didn't have the same spontaneity or the ability to undo, redo that we have now. As you have always had this sort of creative ethos that you're talking about, how has that changed as you have adapted to and adopted new technologies?
The ethos hasn't changed.
But
And
the
I don't
practice
think-
does, right?
Well, the capture has changed.
Uh-huh.
Someone's a brilliant artist, they're a brilliant artist. And when they dump their guts, they dump their guts. It used to be really difficult to capture something right away and have it be really good.
Yeah.
Now it's really easy to capture anything and have it be good enough. And that's the problem I have. There's a drowning in society of entertainment that's good enough.
Which is the enemy of great.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what technology has brought us, is anyone can capture anything and put it out there, and because it's different, it's good enough for that 45 seconds. The people that I've been fortunate enough to work with that deliver a deep message in a truly artistic way. I don't know how else to say it. Anybody can spout a hip hop rhyme,
Right.
and say, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you, whatever it is, and be street for 3 minutes. Okay, cool. But there are people that will spout a rhyme that actually has 3 or 4 deep meanings to it that come from a source of really emotional drive, and will still be listened to 10 years from now.
Yep.
And it's harder to find those or be exposed to those because of this frontline attack to monetize 45-second barrages of good enough. Same thing true like with virtual reality. I did VR stuff in 89 and 90. You know, my brother is one of the forefronts of virtual reality. We had, you know, head mount displays and all kinds of stuff. And now the technology itself seems to be what you're playing with. You're not actually consuming a message or an art or an art form or anything that escalates you, I think, on an emotional level. And by that I mean, if it's supposed to make you sad, it should make you real sad. If it's supposed to make you happy, make you real happy.
Yeah.
Or communicate a message or whatever it is. But with all of the availability of this and that, and now with the advent of AI, you're even getting rid of real creativity just to be able to use gizmos.
Yeah.
And I can't wait for that to run its course and for its 15 minutes of fame to be done so we can get back to real soul.
Well, you know, and part of what you're talking about is part of what has always really bugged me is the fact that when we had these limitations, we really had to be more creative in terms of what we were doing. You know, I want to hear a string sound. I don't happen to have a string section.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you know, well, I have a monophonic synthesizer. I could detune the oscillators and run it like 4 or 5 times and get, you know, something like that. You had to really scramble for that, and you had to be, it wasn't a matter of, okay, I can do, you know, 56 vocal takes and then comp.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do one. I might do a second and maybe comp out of those or something like that, but I don't have that many tracks. I only have, you know, 2 compressors in my rack. I only have a couple of reverbs. I don't have, you know, 550 different reverbs to page through. Doesn't that, I mean, to me, I think that really robs a lot of the spontaneity.
Well, I think what it does is it gives the illusion of never not having spontaneity, but what it does is it steals the requirement of an artist to make a decision.
Yes.
And when an artist, let's just take a singer. If you have 2 tracks, so you go out and you sing it, and you come in and you listen to what you did, and you consume the whole thing, phrasing, pitch, which words you chose, why did you use them there, the inflections, everything. And then you go do a second track and it feels stiff because now you did everything you thought you should do perfect, and it's not as good. Then you have the dilemma, okay, I have the first one that feels great, and then I have the second one. Chances are when you have the limitations, you will work on the second one until it feels as good as the first one, or decide to use the bulk of the first one. But you don't just go out and do an onslaught of 20 passes and then assemble like a Lego set words, you know. And there's a definition that you have to be aware of, at least that I have to stay aware of. There's a difference between entertainment and a record. And by a record, I mean a recording of a moment that's an emotion. Could take you a year to make it, but it's one moment. Those come from decisions. Entertainment comes from this works, this works, this works. Could take a year to do that too, but none of it really seems to grind at my heart like
it's transitory.
Yeah. That's a good word for it. And so having to make a decision really enhances spontaneity because you have to know when it was real spontaneity or when you're faking it.
Yeah.
And make a choice. You know,
Committing.
you can do another solo, but we're going to lose this one.
Yeah.
Do you really think it's going to be better?
I think the idea of making that commitment and saying, okay, you know, well, in olden days, you know, it was because we had limited tracks. But nowadays, I think it is still very useful to have a certain discipline and say, you know, yes, I have, you know, the complete set of reverbs from, you know, every chamber in America, you know, every chamber in the world, you
Doesn't
know,
mean
whatever.
you need any of them.
Exactly, you know, and just because I can pitch this one note up, maybe it's cooler if it's a little bit flat, you know, and
That's where, and this is why I have great admiration and respect for a lot of the producers that I've been fortunate enough to meet, because whether they're young or old, if they have the intuitive sense or you were trained in that school, you can look at 50 choices and immediately spot 3 of them are real.
yeah,
The other 47 were
expendable.
punching a clock.
Yes, yes.
And out of those 3, commit.
Mhm.
You know, and in order to do that, you have to tap into what Rick's book talks about, which is find, you know, as best you can, connect to whatever all this is and
Yeah.
how it relates to you, and trust it.
Yeah.
You got to trust it.
Yeah, and sometimes we make wrong decisions. You know, I mean, I'm sure that some of the, you know, I mean, some of the greatest decisions that we will never know about died in the studio because somebody chose a different take, whatever, you know.
Oh,
But
the greatest rock and roll band I can't play you is Toto.
there you go, exactly.
They're absolutely, I mean, for
sure.
loose, unbelievable, chaotic rock and roll, those guys are, you know, they were the best band I'd ever heard.
Mhm.
But they were so proficient in the studio, and what they had to make for their fan base and to make an agreement among all of them and to give them the well-deserved success they had was a different capture. It was a different recording.
Absolutely.
But as a band, none better. But I can't play them. Those are run-throughs.
Yeah, yeah,
They
exactly.
didn't get chosen.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I think back even to like, you know, when they started coming out with all those outtakes from the Beatles' Abbey Road sessions, you know, over the years, the one conclusion I reached was, you know, 9 out of 10 times they picked the best take.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
whether it's just and you know, you talk about vocal inflections, for example. Some of those scratch vocals were close but not quite,
Sure,
you know? And
sure.
it's not just that these things are ingrained in our memories, which they are, obviously. But it's also that, you know, again, they were being spontaneous. They had to make certain
They
commitments.
had somebody like George Martin sitting there going, "Not yet, fellas."
Yeah, yeah,
You know, or you already had it.
yeah.
Whatever. I mean,
Not to
that's-
mention these brilliant engineers, you know, like the Jeff Emmerichs and, you know, and
all those cats, but they all took production.
yeah.
You know, Peter
Yeah.
Asher is one of the most
Oh, he's
genius people I've ever worked
underrated.
with.
I got
Yeah.
to look over his shoulder once at a Cherokee session.
Don't even get me
just-
started on Rated. He's one of the best producers I've ever known, and he was one of the first guys to teach me. I was Val Garay's assistant. Peter was the client, and Peter would teach me production. I could stay at his house. He was the most welcoming human being. He would, you know, if it was really late, come crash at my house, drive in with me in the morning. We would talk all the way. But he was the guy that would pick the takes.
Uh-huh.
He would get the best band he could, and they were in effect a grid, a musical grid. You get Waddy
description.
and Cooch and,
Yeah.
and Russ Kunkel and Leland or Glob or any of those guys, Doug Moore, that group of
They
people that
locked
goes
in.
on, Lukather,
Yeah.
they could play it pretty much identical every time, but they would always play it. Peter always had them hearing the vocal. And so if they did 5 takes, he had a notebook and he would just write down which take had the best vocal on which part.
Uh-huh.
And then you'd get done and he'd say, okay, the vocals were great on take 3, the choruses were great on take 2, cut it together, I'm going to go get food. And you'd cut it together, the band was always flawless, and then you had a lead vocal that was incredible. And then he would take that, if it was one take that seemed the best, and he would build vocals based off of what he learned.
But there you have first of all, you have a practiced band of people who are playing together. And that, I mean, you know, one of the things that I really lament is the fact that so many of the younger generation
They don't practice.
Well, it's not that they don't practice, it's that they don't have the opportunity to play together.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, that's
I
true.
taught a college class, and I got 12 kids in front of me, and I said, "So how many of you have ever been in a band?" One. You know,
Yeah.
and that to me is the most important thing, because once you've played together with other people, or even witnessed it, and you understand the synergies that are happening, the energy that's going on between different players who are looking each other in the eye, you know.
Again, back to Toto. Those
Yeah.
guys go back to junior high school.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, they're hardly the only ones. You know, it's like as a bass player, anytime I have met a drummer who I lock with, it's akin to falling in love. You know, it's like
Sure.
you lock in with this person, and you are just in another plane. You really are. And
Chances are you grew up listening to some of the same records, have the same influences.
Yep.
There's a vibe, you know, and that's the universal consciousness as well. I don't have any explanations for it. I just know it's real.
It is, and I think that's what we are trying to capture. And that's why I wonder, you know, when you talk about like newer technologies and stuff like that, does that impact your creative process at all? Or do you,
It makes it easier to be fast.
okay,
See, I love current digital technology wins over analog.
no question.
To me, you know, guys that want to record to tape and then transfer it,
Yeah.
I don't know what to say to them.
You know, it's like maintaining an old car. You can do it.
What you remember, see, my problem is that the nostalgia for the old records, what I love about the old records is the performance, that rhythm section, and the sparsity. They
Yeah.
only owned 2 reverbs.
Yeah.
One of them probably didn't work. And, you know, and the
Yeah,
delay
yeah.
was an extra tape machine.
Yep.
So they wrote amazing songs, played amazing takes, chose the right ones,
Yep.
and worked really hard to make that great. And it wasn't because it was being reproduced off of tape. Tape is an inefficient medium for reproduction. And
Yeah.
it requires, to do it well, it requires such attention to detail. Each track should be biased. Each reel of tape should be quality control checked.
Yeah,
It-
yeah.
It's just, it's a nightmare.
Not to
And
mention just the time taken to rewind, and what that
That-
does to
yeah.
the creative process, all of the actual
what it
dynamics
takes to use
of,
that device.
yeah,
But there's a lot of mistakes that are being made when you go to a box to record, because the habits of overcoming the inefficiencies of the previous medium are still employed in the analog chain going to the new reproductive medium, and you wind up with stuff that's too bright, too hard, too close mic'd, too this, too that, whatever. And people say, well, digital sucks. No, it doesn't. You're just using it wrong.
yeah, that is true. That is true, and that happens a lot. And a lot of that has to do with a lack of training of, you know, people who have never mic'd a drum set, for
Yeah,
example.
or listened. You know, a
In the
lot of
room.
people don't listen, they look.
Yeah,
It's really,
or they don't listen in the room.
oh, don't even get me started.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's like, why don't you go out there in the room and stand in front of the drummer?
I know
see what
engineers that
hap-
cut
you know.
tracks and have never gotten up from behind the console.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is what we're trying to capture. We're trying to capture the essence of a live performance. Now that, you know, I have had online conversations with people who differ with me on that and say, you know, look, this is a different art form now, it's a different era, and that's great. You know, I have an amazing amount of respect for these people who can do things like take a vocal out of, you know, 247 tracks and assemble something, you know, or, you know, even like, who's the guy, BT, who created that stutter effect, you know, things like that. I think that's brilliant. I really do.
And that's from new technology.
Exactly.
Well, we were talking about Michael Beinhorn earlier. Beinhorn's the kind of guy who can he will stay true to his first impression in his guts and assemble it from 1 to 100 sources. I don't care what it is.
Yep.
And he will take 1 to 100 hours to get there. But he knows what that single first impression was
Yes.
and stays true to it. That's really using the technology that we have, whether it's a tape machine or what the mediums are. But there's no clock on making it feel good. There's just an awareness of what real is. and everybody's got a different one.
Absolutely.
Some people stay on the couch and wait till they hear it and then say, that's it. It could take an hour, it could take a week. Some people know what they want and will just have people keep playing and playing and playing until they hear it.
Yeah, I think I'm of that school myself, but you know, it's
They're both fine.
it depends on who you're working with too, you know, obviously, and it depends what your ultimate goal is in that. But you know, it also comes down to having a tool, and then depending on what artist's hands you put it in, what are they going to do with it? You know, I think a lot of the great accidents that have happened in, you know, for example, recording, but this goes for all the arts, they happen because somebody takes thing A that was designed for this job and says, what happens if I do this with it? Mm-hmm. You know,
Glenn Johns and tape flanging, Itchy Coupon.
there you go, exactly.
That was a mistake.
Yeah, exactly. And so much of it is that, I think, where you just say, you know, what if I try this? You know, what if I do something completely different? And, you know, that's a hell of a lot more interesting, I think, than how do I recreate something that's already been done, which is what a lot of what we have now, I think, leads us to is, you know, well, you sound like so-and-so. Let's make the song sound like this, you know.
There are people out there, there's cats out there that are not, and I find it very inspiring. There's young engineer producers that I've gotten to work with or have, you know, worked with me, and then they go on their own and they play me what they're doing. And they're not trying to do what's been done. It's inspiring to them because it feels good. Mm-hmm. But, and also I think that the best creativity of what you're explaining happens when you have no money.
Yeah.
All my favorite records happen when bands either were just getting signed or were broke. So you had to make all 3 microphones that you owned work because that's all you had.
Give you a great story about that. I was with a friend of mine who was a publisher, and we went up to Santa Barbara to. I was the producer, and we were looking at tunes, you know, and we went to a songwriter thing where they were pitching songs to us, and there was one particular song, one particular tape, and this guy's voice was really like almost eerie in a certain way, and I said, you know, whose is this? And the guy raises his hand. I said, so what'd you do? How'd you cut the vocal? And he kind of got this embarrassed look on his face, and he said, well, I don't have a microphone, so I plugged in my headphones in the mic jack, and I recorded it that way. And I said, dude, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, because again, you're making something work in a way that it wasn't intended.
Right. It is a microphone. It's just a huge diaphragm.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But it sounded so weird,
Sure.
you know, and just it happened to be with the quality of his vocal and everything else that was going on. I was like, wow, this is really, you know.
Sterling Uhl is a producer that I work with here at the Surf Shack, and he's 21. And the only vocals he believes are the ones that he can scream into his little cassette machine. So he just takes a line out of that into the rig. That's the vocal mic.
Cool.
Because that's what it is. I did a record. I was helping Ron St. Germain mix a band in New York, and we were working on this one tune, and Ron was working on something else. And the singer came to me and he said, "Man, I've never been happy with this lead vocal. It's too good. It's too correct." And so I asked him, "Well, when were you happy with your vocal?" And he goes, "Well, the demo." And I says, "Well, how'd you record the demo?" And he goes, "Well, I do those in my kitchen after I put the kids to bed on my Porta studio. And I just sing, you know, on the kitchen table." And I says, "Well, that's where we need the lead vocal from."
Yeah, where's the Porta studio?
I took a cassette and I put a mono mix without, you know, a headphone track on track 4.
Uh-huh.
Track 3 was time code. Track 2 was blank. And track 1 was his. And I said, "Take it home, listen to the mix, and record on track 1 so there's no leakage from time code, and just go do a vocal and bring me the cassette." And then we locked up to the cassette and transferred the vocal, and he had his kitchen. He believed every word. So did I. It sounded great.
And tape hiss be damned, right?
Who the hell hears it?
Exactly.
If you have a lot of it, somebody's going to make a plug-in that duplicates it. It's feel. If it feels good, you win.
I mean, I have to laugh about that because, there's, I do know a lot of synthesizer aficionados. And I love old synths, man. I'm, definitely have a certain attachment to them and everything. But, you're not going to tell me that buried in a mix, I'm going to really be able to hear the difference between a virtual version of, a mini Moog versus the real thing. I might hear it in the studio, but and again, we'll go back to our mutual friend Michael Beinhorn. He told me once about doing a 2-inch 8-track head stack, which I think Zoe Thrall was telling me about how he pushed them into doing that at Power Station. Look, brilliant idea, but Michael himself said to me, it sounded like the kick and the bass from hell. It was just godly, right? And then we looked at each other when we realized we're the only ones who are ever going to experience this. Because as soon as you take it out of the room,
it's done.
Different. Yeah.
That's one of the things I always, whenever I am fortunate enough to do what you do, which is teach, I tell the kids, I said, the only thing that matters is the vegetable aisle at Kroger. If your mix comes out of the roof, it's above your head while you're looking at celery and it sounds good, you win. That's all that matters. All the rest of this shit doesn't matter. And it starts with a great song, great melody, and the right key, the right speed, with a good backbeat. The rest of it's something for us to do.
Never thought of it that way.
It's true.
I'm never going to see Kroger the same way.
With Atmos, Apple's releasing all this stuff in spatial and Atmos and this and that. Half the people don't pay attention to the buttons on their phone. They hit the title and they want to play it, and they throw the phone on the table. So essentially it's mono. And whether the source is an Atmos source or a stereo source, no one knows. I can't figure it out, and I own a phone. And I'm in this business. Half the time, oh shit. That was turned on? When did that get turned on? Last update. It updated in the middle of the night, and it changed my settings. I have no idea. I just know it doesn't feel like it grooved yesterday. What's wrong? But if I hadn't cut the track or I wasn't intimately aware of the record, I wouldn't know something was wrong. And that's how people get exposed to stuff. So you have to, the responsibility now, I feel, is for us as the conduit between expression and playback, is to figure out all the places that it can completely fall apart and make sure it doesn't.
Yeah.
Or figure out how to get it to, if it does fall apart, still complement.
Yeah.
Solve the phasing issues, solve the placement issues, solve the delay issues.
Well, and that's a nice segue there, because I know you have been doing a lot with Atmos and with immersive, and actually you were doing that stuff, as you say, years and years ago. What's your take on the latest? Now it has become more than just a trend. Now, obviously, we have companies like Apple and Sony and Dolby investing a hell of a lot in making sure that we have content, paying extra for Atmos mixes, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, it's different than surround. It's different. I mean, you're doing object-based mixing now and stuff like that, I assume. How has it changed for you the way you're working now?
Well, how I'm working, I am practicing daily on using the tools they provide. And the tools change all the time.
Right.
It's really a lot of fun, and I have a good time, but ultimately, I go out of one of those oratones. My end result has to mono down and sound like a groove. And that comes from having made a bunch of records in mono years ago and learning what that is and getting back to it. And all of the things I learned have nothing to do with technology. They have to do with an arranger.
Absolutely. But what I'm kind of fascinated by with Atmos as opposed to all the other. I mean, we've both lived through quad and 5.1,
same
7.1. Yeah,
Sound comes from all around you.
yeah. But
That's what it is.
Yeah, but what I do find interesting is that you have the ability now, because you can actually place things in a virtual room, so to speak. You have the ability now to, let's say, take an element like an acoustic guitar, for example, and instead of it being in this frame here of, left to right and back and forth, I can give it some height. I can put it way over there. I can change the ambience of it. I've got a lot more flexibility in terms of how I can separate components of a mix.
In theory, yes.
Yeah.
In actual practice, no, you don't.
That's what I'm asking you.
No.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe in cars in 5 years, they'll wire the speakers correctly, and left will be left and right will be right and center will be center, but probably not. In the last 5 homes probably that I've been to that had, come and check out, we bought an Atmos system. The center channel was either not connected correctly or it wasn't connected at all. Half the time, most of my friends think their stereo sounds really wide. It's just because they have one side out of phase. So, you're only as good as the weakest link. And right now the weakest link is how the consumer gets it. And the companies that provide us these tools have interests other than the music. They actually don't care about the music. The music is a vehicle for them to sell what they sell.
Oh, absolutely.
So, Apple sells headphones. They sell iPhones. They sell computers. They sell music. And they want you to buy it again with another label. But it's so confusing how you get it and where you get it and how it plays back that it sometimes is bad for the tunes, even though you've got a new gizmo. Dolby, once you've licensed the Atmos system, they don't care who you are or where you are.
Yes, I've discovered that, and there's a lot
they're very frustrating. And
But
a lot of us
binaural
worked
stuff.
really hard to help.
Yeah.
And it's proven to be heartbreaking.
Well, the binaural stuff in particular intrigues me because I don't think they've really figured out how to do it right yet. I think if somebody really figures out how to create a spatial environment through artificial whatever with 2 standard speakers, that's when it might actually take off.
It will happen. It'll never be, you're never going to get 2 speakers to put sound behind you.
Exactly.
But it can give you the appearance if you're in a sweet spot. And there's a lot of new, very well thought out systems and algorithms and approaches, certainly in Silicon Valley, that my brother knows because he's more in VR. Guys that are brilliant, but it has to eventually get to wherever there's enough of an income stream to warrant pursuing the technology.
Yes.
And right now, good is good enough.
Well, and that's why they're forcing this on us now.
Having said that, I enjoy Dolby Binaural. When you can set your own settings, and I have my own trial and error template of what's near, what's not near, what's this, what's that. I wind up with records that come out of speakers that I find very compelling.
Does it have to change per song, though?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, it doesn't. Usually
Interesting.
it winds up being, because if you're really, that's the difference between just mixing and balancing.
Oh.
If you're just mixing, you can change it each song because you don't really have a handle on what the effects are or why you have them. If you have them, adding binaural effects is just adding another effect to what you already want happening on the left side.
Okay.
So using the binaural algorithm and some of the genius behind the early settings really does add a spatial element to an instrument that's there. So if you have it on while you're mixing, then you're hearing that component and you can use it musically. And that's wonderful.
And can you actually use it in almost an object-based kind of methodology like that, where you can...
Whether it's object-based or it could have been an old quad system doesn't matter. But objects give you the ability to give each individual instrument, voice, or sound its own spatial element.
Right.
That's why object-based mixing is so much more fluid.
Well, it's
in
also
terms
the
of
translation
musicality.
factor, right?
Yes,
Like if I have an
fine.
object-based mix, theoretically, whether I have 12 speakers or 2,
Oh,
theoretically.
that's the genius of
Yeah,
Atmos.
exactly.
If you decide you want something, if you're sitting here and you want it right there and you go to another room that's got speakers 30 feet away, it's still going to figure
Exactly.
out what you told it to do and put it right there.
So has that changed the way you mix?
Yeah, I mix always in Atmos and in binaural. So when I'm done, I can deliver it in all the formats.
And yet you can still collapse it down to a mono mix.
Absolutely.
That right there is an art form, I think.
You just got to practice. It's not hard. There's so many mixers that are better than me. You know, Clear Mountain can fold stuff down to mono in 30 seconds and it'll sound amazing.
Yeah,
That's
well,
Bob.
yeah,
He's that way.
exactly.
He can do that.
Exactly. And, also it really depends on the material. What's your
Well-
relationship to the material?
Yeah, you have to understand musically what you're doing, and good old school mixers do. You know, the guys that are my heroes, like Al Schmidt, I could take any mix he does, and we did a bunch of Atmos stuff before he passed away. I would go in with him and help him, and Steve Genowick certainly did a bunch with him.
Yeah.
And it was really just, he didn't understand, Al, you can't put it, you can hear it over there, but that's not the way to get it over there.
Uh-huh.
And Genowick would kind of, Steve Genowick is one of the greatest producers of Al Schmidt, and I use the word production in the terms of he was bumper guards in a bowling alley. He didn't tell you how to throw the ball.
Yep.
That's the way Don Was produces records. He just makes sure that you don't throw gutters.
There's another brilliant one right there. Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys that are brilliant that way, that leave the band alone. The aforementioned novelist, Rick, he just knows when he likes something, and there's a lot of guys that you can learn a ton from that are like that.
Yeah, and I think that certain amount of intuitiveness is actually, to my mind, it's what enables you to be that bridge between the extreme right-brained, artistic, creative thing and, how do I translate that? We always talk about the engineers at Abbey Road. George Martin was brilliant, but George Martin didn't think of how to, create a tape loop by holding a pencil way out here in the hallway. That was Jeff Emmerich, or those are the guys who really.
They're mechanics.
Yeah,
You need to
exactly.
increase the physical distance. Well,
Yeah.
let's do it.
But
There's a chair, there's a pencil, you got duct tape.
Right, but somewhere along that line, there's that translation between the artist saying, "I want it to sound like I'm on Mount Everest,"
Right.
Or my favorite thing was, I had a guitar player once say to me, "Can you make my guitar sound more brown?"
That's Waddy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Waddy
it's
used that adjective.
I
only
believe
once.
it. I believe it. And it's like, okay, so you probably want a warmer EQ, and yeah.
Waddy once told me, he says, my favorite bass drum is what I imagine to be a golf ball. I said, what? He goes, yeah, it's just this little golf ball. It's nice and warm and boom, boom. And for me to be able to just engineer and not have to produce, like the music is not the arrangements are not my responsibility, and have a producer who produces the engineering. Like I just did a project with Matt Rawlings. Guy's genius. Can play anything on a piano, anywhere, at any time, any piano. It sounds amazing.
Uh-huh.
And he'll go out and he knows the key and the changes and the this and the that, and he'll come in and he'll say, the drums have to be trashy. And then he'll leave. And he'll say, just listen to the song, you'll know what to do. And he trusts me enough for me to trust his adjective enough to just get my first impression of trashy. Or this has to be really clean and intimate. I don't want anything that takes away from the vocal. Okay, change everything. I was wrong. Carpets, blankets, this, that, and the other thing. Steve Jordan is like that. Waddy Wachtel, of course, is like that.
Yeah.
Peter Asher's like that.
Yes.
Those are the producers that when I work for them, I really get produced.
I could see that. I got to watch Peter Asher. I got to watch Phil Ramone.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was another absolute artist in that respect, you know. And I think there really is a certain magic to understanding that and being able to say, you know, I'm not going to talk to the guitar player and tell him that he needs that I want to put 10K, you know, I want to, you know, roll off 10K over here. I'm going to talk to the guitar player and say, okay, I'm going to make your guitar sound a little different. You know, whatever adjective it is, trashy, warmer, whatever. And I think being able to translate that to this that's an art form
Well,
too.
it all starts in front of the microphone. That's one thing I can promise you. Like, I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
did sessions in Nashville for Matt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the guitar's hurting too much. Can you do something? And they would look at the board and I'd say, sure. And I'd go out to the studio and I would tell the guitar player it hurts. And he would notch something or change pickups, or I'd back the mic up, or I'd change the mic. And didn't touch anything in the control room.
It's not about perfection. It's about a sonic fingerprint, really. And I think that's, you know, if you listen to the drums on those early Elvis Costello records, trash, total trash. And yet it's the exact right trash.
Yeah, but the guy's playing his ass off.
Exactly. And therefore he's playing the trash in exactly the right way to make it work with that song.
Sure.
And if you were to put a really nice, you know, like a Steely Dan clean drum sound on that, it would sound like shit.
Yeah. would
You
suck.
know?
The groove
Yeah.
would be gone.
Exactly.
But the thing to remember is that, and with early records, and with the Mavericks, case in point, the Mavericks, I get to straddle both sides. Musically, it's all Raul.
Uh-huh.
Picking the takes, I get to be involved in because there's a balance between first take magic from their drummer, who's always, the first take is always amazing, right? And then third or fourth take happiness with the trumpets and the rhythm section or the guitar players, because they finally figured out the parts, but the whole thing's dragging. So then what you have to do is you have to get the feel take and then fix the parts where they weren't sure what they were doing, and
Yeah.
build a record.
Yeah.
And the production with that is after 3 or 4 takes, somebody has to say, let's go to another title.
Yes.
We may have to come back.
Yes, because
But-
otherwise you beat it to death.
Well, the spontaneity that I crave, which is usually the rhythm section, has happened.
Yeah.
We missed it. So we can either go back and get where I heard it and try and fix it to where everyone's happy, or I'm wrong. That wasn't the take. It wasn't meant to happen. Like our boy's book says, it's just we have to be a conduit tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or later today.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Or next
it's-
week or next year or whatever it is. Yeah.
It's so easy to make a good record that it's hard. Because you have to just trust what you feel instead of think.
And a lot of times you don't know right away. You know, a lot of times it's like not until you've made a lot of those commitments, made those decisions, and you're way down the road, then you realize, oh yeah, this is really turning into something, or it's not, right?
Man, I don't know. I've still to this day play cassettes of stuff that I did on a Porta Studio with J.D. Souther and Waddy at 4 a.m, just the two of them all huddled around a microphone.
Probably the greatest
Feels
stuff,
and sounds
right?
greater
Yeah.
than half the shit I did last year.
Well, and you know, that goes into the whole thing of commodifying this stuff, you know. I mean, most of the greatest work creatively that any of us have done never gets heard, because so much of it is the outtakes, or is the, you know, the live, you know, the very ethereal, ephemeral stuff that you know is gone, you know, or we recorded it, but no, that's not the take, or that song's not going to end up on the album, or whatever it is,
Well,
you know.
there's two things that I can be involved in terms of choices, and you have to make a decision that that's what you need to do. But the first is, if you're always in record as often as possible, then at least you didn't miss it. If the people whose picture is on the cover, who are really the only people that matter,
Right.
decide that you're wrong, that's not the best take.
It's their record.
It's their record. Let it go. If you need a life that delivers more reward than just the joy of that pursuit, you have to approach it from a totally different headspace. And by that I mean, really, if you have a big family and you have a lot of things to provide for, You have to pay attention to being involved in more things other than just the joy of being in this swirling sphere of creativity, and grab it and here it is.
Yeah.
You know,
'Cause it
and that's
doesn't
where
pay.
I let go of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's not my publishing, it's not my song, it's not my album. I did my great joy, which was to do the best I could to get what you explained right away, and then offer my, you know, opinions and help as much or as little after that.
Clearly, you're doing a pretty good job of that. Otherwise, you wouldn't get the callbacks, you know.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I get fired a lot too. I can be an opinionated asshole.
Well, you know, that's part of the gig too, though, isn't it?
I guess. Yeah, you know, being honest is part of the gig.
It is. It is. So let me wrap with the question that I usually like to ask people from my generation. What advice would you give to 15-year-old you coming up in this music industry, in this age of technology now?
If you love it the way I still love it, get a job and don't go home. The rest will sort itself out.
Interesting advice, yeah?
That's it. I mean, that's what I did. I've been doing it 46 years. I'm still a beginner. I'm still learning. There's people that have started after me, retired before me, and are worth $100 million. And they understand the business of music, and they made incredible records. They put themselves in the right place at the right time. That's not what I set out to do. What I set out to do was learn how to hold a hammer and a chisel and build shit. And the only thing that's changed is the hammers and the chisels. But that's still all I want to do. And if that's what you want to do, then just start doing it and don't go home. And the minute it doesn't work for you, go home.
Great advice, man.
I don't know what else to say.
Niko Bolas, thank you for being my guest, man.
My pleasure, man. Sure. I hope that there's something good in there.
I can't think of a better thing to conclude it on than that. That's fucking hilarious, dude. If it doesn't work out, go home.
True.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.